Blackbird. By Joseph Wenberg. Sailed to Cochin China, Rangoon to Siam. Along the coast of Southeast Asia to the Dismal Islands. The above is a fragment from the log of a 19th century sailing ship split on a reef during a storm in the Saram Sea. September 28, 2012. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. July 13, 1867. Batavia, Java. The islands. Have they been called a string of pearls? Who knows? Below the continent of Asia, out of the Malay Peninsula, they stretch to the south and east, hundreds of them of near infinite variety. Coral atolls, having lived for centuries below the sea, then due to climatic and global conditions one day push their rose and oyster-colored shapes through the surface, and a glistening breaker swells over the rise, to be repeated forever and ever until the atoll once more slips beneath the waves. Volcanic mountains and a million miles of beach strand. Boulders and crab shells, palm fronds, and mangroves, a dying rotten mass or glorious aspiration, more incomprehensible than can be assimilated, they form a broken fence off the mainlands of the region, offering a first step to islands ever more distant, every more calling. After the first string of islands another appears bending in the same general direction as the first, smaller though, and many of these facing the widest expanse of ocean existing on earth. The surrounding seas can be very shallow, and sometimes of the deepest trenches. At night the islands are black against a black horizon outlined. The waters between them can be illuminated. A whale surfaces, breathes, then dives into the depths. Plant matter drifting further seaward bobs and weaves for a moment caused by the disruption, then realigns itself on its former course, a bounce of light periodically changing. Inland the tropical forest arrests the land and is the land, roots in the fallen leaves and fruits. Slashing rains create torrents that carry off plants and trees, clearing spindles and spokes leading in every direction, and when the rain finally ends, leaving a separation making it seem a river was here, but soon closes in and the leaves block the light from the new plants just taking root. There is the sun. The trees can be in a breeze. Blossom flowers fragrant fill the air. Fresh water caught in underwater tanks drip a flow long enough year to give the land its motion, carrying foodstuffs to every living thing the islands need. In the canopies snuggled and eating those fragrant blossoms, what is animated moves as if it too is part of the overflow. Drip drip drip. Nothing silent but the vibrant notations of islands adrift in a universe only briefly hitching a ride because the night is too dark and lost in seas. Drip drip drift. Pandanus root. Betel nut. Fine as silk woven plant matter coverings and shields laid upon by rice terraced paddies yanking a fine water buffalo, and in the temples burning incense and taboo can extract enough substance to feed. But rain can be pelting and even cold. On island that cannot hold the rain it is arid, scrubs grow, a place of hottest sun, and each tide uncovers and strands, scrapes, and rearranges, fells another palm coconut to the current. As the universe itself has and always will be, such are these islands, eternally fixed in their position under a constellation of stars grasped by the cosmic. Granite and obsidian, silicon and gold, nautilus and lamprey, ornithopod, orangutan, coleoptera, waterfalls cascading down precipitous hills, flowers of every color cascading alongside those waterfalls. Trees of evergreen broadleaf sinking a twisted mass of roots into the sides of these hills in a way seemingly most unlikely they should persevere, but be washed into the accumulating rivers below and carried out to sea, in the same sort of action that from the most remote regions of Asia and Southeast Asia, the Himalayas, and the Brahmaputra, the great rivers of Siam, similar flotsam reaches these islands. Spices. The cultivated lands of rice. A warrior class. A paradise here and there. Trading long before Caesar. The sea off many of the islands shallow and clear, the white gold and yellow sand daintily laced with pale green and turquoise shadings. There is activity in the early morning and late afternoon, the people seeking out the shade during the hot hours. A ceremonial tree, a hut. Fires lit at night can be seen from the sea, and the same vibration that is in the earth comes from the villages lifting off the ground, where it can mingle and disperse in the verdure and sweetness of the forest. Origins. At about the time in history when Charlemagne was forming his kingdom, on the back end of the work done by his grandfather, Charles Martel, who defeated the Moors at the Battle of Tours, making a large part of what would become Europe safe for the prospect of civilization, and on the generosity of his father, Pepin III, aka Pepin the Short, Charlemagne, the talent of his generation, learned, scholarly, patron of arts and things useful for the making of a kingdom, dreaming of empire, and indeed, he would become crowned the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. There existed on the other side of the world, a world unknown even to Charlemagne and the wise men he had gathered into his court. This other side of the world was an island kingdom whose people were part and parcel of the seas wherein specks of sand and coral collected to form land, tiny, inconspicuous, hardly above water, perilous at times, but rhapsodical mostly, infinitely varied in size and shape, hardened ground on which they lived. Their moments in time, like the mats they slept on, were finely woven. Day passed into night, and night into morning, and for the most part their lives wafted high as one with the tropical breezes. They could, however, be turned apprehensive if shifts in the wind, changes in the weather, announced the approach of a hurricane. On this island we are looking at such was the case, and the islanders concluded that for this storm, which they judged would make a direct hit on their island, they would have to sail across their lagoon to an island on the other side of the 70-mile-wide reef-encircled body of water. There they would be safely out of the most harmful aspects of such a storm, and when it passed they could return. Prayers. Incantations. Rituals. Canoes filled with people and launched. Speeding across the lagoon under full sail they raced away from the cyclone, a Stone Age people, at a high pitch of excitement, cutting the single most important dimension of their lives and singing its praise. Carry us to the hiding island. Take us to the fire cave. On you water spirit we are gliding. A people not afraid, but loved by you. By nightfall they reached the island, a rocky elevated place, twisted and torn with crevices, not a spot to set a village on, but with caves enough to keep a people safe and beyond the reach of the terrible demon which would soon make its presence known on the home island. Lit by the flames carried in their canoes, torches were lifted and handed out to some of the men who knew the way to the particular cave in the interior that would be their hiding place as the winds and rains lashed all around. A column of light moving through a barren place, torchlight bleeding into spaces, now in shadow, now in glow, creating an effect of soft beauty, making each heart swell with the knowledge that they of all living things should know of this place and be under the spells of ancestors and spirits who made it an enchantment. The cave was large enough to accommodate all the people of the village, who quickly upon entering set out spaces for themselves, prepared fires fueled by wood carried with them in their canoes as well as organic matter gathered at the beach, and were soon eating meals just as if they were still on their island. During the course of these events the wind outside increased and could be heard making a full nuisance of itself, lifting things and knocking them around for no good reason fathomed by these people. The rain came and the storm lived outside. Gathered so, they felt the warmth of their kin and the security it granted. As was the custom for such storm passings, the oldest living member then started to speak. In the 10 generations before Midi-Cal, my father was born, and before 7 generations of ancestors before those, the people came to our island. I will tell you how they came to our island, for you want to hear it from my lips, as it will pass on again through others, and it will be as I say heard tonight as we gather, the people, as our island shakes in the swells of the earth and the sea, in the air above. When these ancestors were first on our land, it was the air above and the sea around our ankles which brought them from the earth of far away. On that earth these ancestors and their ancestors lived for 279 generations, and each one is still known as the men among us, Lit Tot, Badi, and Ninli, recount them name for name each time the moon goes away after turning in the sky 4 times. The moon does this to try and trick us, and we must always look to the skies or be fooled. In the forest of the other earth our long ago fathers had their eyes shut. Food and the places where they slept were taken from them. In the highest of the land a great cold stood upon it, white and deadly. The gods hid there so we could not see them. Making themselves look like men, they would visit the men who lived at the edge of the cold and give them charms. Soon they became strong and said, "We will move about and we will take new lands. We will make all under us." This is not what the gods intended they do with the charms, but it is what they did as living with the cold at their back made them thick, without a sweetness of any kind. The ancestors of the people lived near the Great Sea. They fished in its waters and traveled to its many islands to visit kin, to make exchanges. Thus they lived, our ancestors. If you look in the waters of our lagoon, you can still see them. There in the other world they lived for generations, coming out of the sea and taking themselves down along land, along the sea coast and inland, hot and cold, forcing themselves to march when in their heart was one lovely spot. And when they came to where they lived, they knew this was where they would stay. Here for long they lived, the great sea in front of them, a vast jungle behind, and beyond that the earth rose into the sky, holding the moon some nights on its stone peaks. But they had never seen the gods, who remained hidden, high on top the earth, where the gods were one and the same with the stars and the comets. One day, the people from the cold came down upon our ancestors and made them captive. The fish they caught had to be given to the cold men. We were made to grow foods, making our womenfolk's hands rough and soiled. We were made to carve stones, and the cold men would pile them high into the sky and tell us the gods would live on them and we must make more piles. We could not be so kept and felt ourselves an escape, all the oldest men having the same dream. The great sea we knew. We fished its deep waters and knew its drifts and currents. As sure as the water came down along the long land to meet us, we knew it must also return, and it would be far out off the long land where that turning would happen. We would meet the water and let it carry us away, returning, as for sure we had to have come from somewhere, and this would be but the completion of a cycle. Secretly we built our crafts. Long logged crafts, sailed and steered. You could hear the joy rise in the people as these mighty crafts were formed and held in secret, away from the cold men. Food and animals. Water and clothing. Everything needed for such a voyage gathered and made ready. When they had become weak and sullied by their power, the cold people fell to sleeping and we made our escape. The great sea was larger than we thought, and some feared even the people could not make such a voyage. We kept watch on the sky always, as we did not want any of the cold men or their gods to follow us. The men who knew best the ways of sea crossings were always sure, and the people did at last find an island, our island we live on today. We still look every day to the sky, fearful some men and gods will come to our islands to crush us in the sand, to tear us as the coconut and the palm. Having heard their story, everyone went to sleep. In the morning the storm subsided and a bright and glorious day emerged. Happy and self-assured the people ferried themselves across the lagoon, where they found their home a great deal rearranged as a result of the storm, but nothing they were not used to, nor too burdensome for them to put back in order. Life continued.